The clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m. when David pushed his cleaning cart down the marble hallway of Sterling Tower. His shoulders ached from the long shift, but he kept moving. This was his life now, mopping floors and emptying trash bins in one of the fanciest office buildings downtown. Not exactly what he'd dreamed about as a young man, but life had thrown him some hard punches and he'd learned to roll with them. 3 years ago, his wife passed away suddenly. Heart attack. She was only 32. One day she was laughing at the breakfast table, and the next day she was gone. Just like that. David was left alone with their daughter Lily, who was only 5 years old at the time. The medical bills piled up fast and his old job at the auto repair shop didn't pay enough to cover everything. So he took this night shift janitor position, because it paid a bit more, and his sister could watch Lily while he worked. Every night, he'd kiss his sleeping daughter goodbye around 10 p.m. and head to the tower. Every morning he'd come home exhausted, get Lily ready for school, make her breakfast, and then catch a few hours of sleep before picking her up again. It wasn't easy. Some days he felt like he was running on empty. But when Lily smiled at him or wrapped her small arms around his neck, he knew he'd do it all over again without hesitation. Tonight was like any other night, or so he thought. He'd already cleaned the lower floors and was making his way up to the executive suites on the 20th floor. These offices belonged to the big shots, the ones who wore $1,000 suits and drove cars that cost more than David would make in 5 years. He didn't resent them, though. Everyone had their own path in life. As he approached the corner office, the biggest one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, he heard something unusual. A child crying. It was past midnight. What was a kid doing here at this hour? David hesitated for a moment, then knocked gently on the half-open door. Inside, he saw a little girl sitting on a leather couch, tears streaming down her face. She looked about Lily's age, maybe a bit younger. Across the room, a man in an expensive suit was pacing back and forth, phone pressed to his ear, talking in that rapid-fire way business people do when they're making deals. The man glanced at David and held up one finger, the universal sign for just a minute. But the little girl kept crying, clutching something in her hands. David looked at the man, then at the crying child, and made a decision. He quietly rolled his cart to the side and walked over to the couch, kneeling down to the girl's level. "Hey there," he said softly. "What's got you so upset?" The little girl looked up at him with big, tearful eyes. She held out a small music box, the kind with a ballerina that spins when you wind it up. But the ballerina wasn't spinning. The box was silent and still. "It's broken," she whimpered. "Grandma gave it to me before she went to heaven. Daddy says we can get it fixed tomorrow, but I want it to work now." David's heart squeezed in his chest. He understood that feeling of loss more than most people. He took the music box gently from her hands and examined it under the light. "Can I take a look?" he asked. The girl nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. The music box was beautiful, hand-painted with tiny flowers and gold trim. Clearly expensive, clearly precious. David turned it over carefully and opened the bottom panel. He'd always been good with his hands. Growing up, he'd helped his dad fix everything from washing machines to wristwatches. Old skills don't disappear just because life changes. He could see the problem right away. One of the tiny gears inside had slipped out of place and the winding mechanism was jammed. Nothing broken, just misaligned. With steady fingers, he used a small screwdriver from his pocket. He always carried a few tools, and carefully worked the gear back into position. Then he adjusted the spring mechanism and tested it gently. The music box came to life. The tiny tinkling melody filled the quiet office, and the ballerina began to turn slowly, gracefully, just as it was meant to. The little girl's face transformed. The tears stopped instantly, replaced by a smile so bright it could have lit up the whole building. She gasped and clapped her hands together. "You fixed it. You fixed it," she squealed, bouncing on the couch. Behind them, the man had ended his phone call. He stood there, watching the scene with an expression David couldn't quite read. For a moment, David worried he might be in trouble. Maybe he'd overstepped. Maybe fancy people didn't like janitors touching their things. But then the man walked over and his face softened. "You fixed it," he said, sounding almost amazed. "Her grandmother passed away 6 months ago. That music box is the only thing she has left from her. I've been meaning to take it to a specialist, but work kept getting in the way, and tonight it finally broke completely. I thought we'd lost it for good. Just a loose gear, David said, handing the music box back to the little girl. Nothing serious. Should work fine now. The girl hugged the music box to her chest, then suddenly reached out and hugged David too. He was surprised but patted her back gently, thinking of Lily at home. The man extended his hand. I'm Richard Harrison. This is my daughter Sophie. And you just did something I couldn't do with all my money and connections. You gave my daughter back a piece of her grandmother. David shook his hand, feeling the difference between his rough, calloused palm and the other man's smooth one. David Torres. Just the night janitor. Glad I could help. Just the janitor? Richard laughed, but it wasn't mean. You've got skills most people don't have anymore. Everything's become so disposable. Nobody fixes things anymore, they just throw them away and buy new ones. Sophie wound up the music box again, watching the ballerina spin with pure joy on her face. The melody was sweet and a little sad, the kind of tune that makes you think of memories and people you've lost. What are you two doing here so late, if you don't mind me asking? David said. Richard sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Divorce proceedings. My ex-wife and I are fighting over custody arrangements, and I had an emergency conference call with lawyers. I had to bring Sophie because my nanny was sick and there was nobody else. Not my finest moment as a father, I'll admit. David nodded. He didn't judge. Life was complicated for everyone, rich or poor. I get it. Single parent myself. My daughter's 8 now. Some nights I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water. Something shifted in Richard's expression. Recognition, maybe, or respect. What happened to your wife, if you don't mind me asking? Heart attack. 3 years ago. Everything changed after that. David stood up, ready to get back to work. But you do what you have to do for your kids, right? Yes, Richard said quietly. You do. He reached into his wallet and pulled out several bills. David held up his hand. No, sir. I don't need payment for that. Just glad to see her smile, Richard insisted, but David politely refused again. Something about taking money for a simple act of kindness felt wrong. Besides, he'd only done what any decent person would do. As David picked up his cleaning supplies to leave, Richard stopped him. Wait, I'd like to do something for you. For both of you, you and your daughter. Would you join us for dinner this weekend? My way of saying thank you properly. Sophie would love to meet another kid. And honestly, I'd like to talk more with someone who understands what it's like to raise a child on your own. David hesitated. A dinner invitation from a millionaire? That felt strange. But something about Richard's expression seemed genuine. And Lily had been so sad lately, missing her mom, missing the simple joys they used to have before everything got hard. You sure about that? David asked. Absolutely. Saturday evening, 7 o'clock. There's an Italian place called Bella Vista downtown. Best food in the city. My treat, of course. David thought about it for a moment longer, then nodded. Okay, we'll be there. Thank you. As he left the office and returned to his cleaning duties, David couldn't help but smile. Sometimes life surprised you in the strangest ways. He'd come to work expecting just another ordinary night of mopping floors and emptying trash. Instead, he'd fixed a treasured toy and somehow made a connection with a stranger who, despite living in a completely different world, seemed to understand the weight of being a single parent. He thought about Lily and how excited she'd be when he told her about the dinner invitation. She rarely got treats like that. Neither of them did. Maybe, just maybe, something good was beginning to happen in their lives again. He didn't dare hope too much. Life had taught him not to. But for the first time in a long time, the future felt a little brighter. David pushed his cart down the hallway, the sound of wheels squeaking softly against the polished floor, and got back to work. There were still 6 more floors to clean before his shift ended at dawn. Saturday evening arrived faster than David expected. All week, Lily had been bouncing around the apartment asking what she should wear and talking nonstop about going to a fancy restaurant. David couldn't remember the last time he'd seen her this excited. Maybe before her mother died. Maybe at her 6th birthday party, back when things were still normal. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror adjusting his tie for the 5th time. It was the same tie he'd worn to his wife's funeral. Dark blue, slightly worn at the edges but still presentable. His only suit was at least 10 years old, bought for a cousin's wedding back when he had a different life. The jacket was a bit tight across the should. Ears now, and the pants were slightly faded, but it was the best he had. Daddy, how do I look? Lily appeared in the doorway wearing her Sunday dress, a simple white dress with small flowers on it. Her mother had bought it for her 2 years ago, and it was getting short on her now. But she'd brushed her hair carefully and even put on the small heart necklace her mom used to wear. David's throat tightened. She looked so much like her mother it hurt sometimes. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." "Like a princess," Lily beamed. "Are there really going to be fancy dishes and tablecloths and everything?" "I think so," David said. "But remember what we talked about, okay? Use your napkin, say please and thank you, and don't order the most expensive thing on the menu." "I know, Daddy," Lily said, rolling her eyes a little. "You've told me 1,000,000 times." They took the bus downtown because David's old car was making weird noises again, and he didn't trust it for this important dinner. The bus ride took 40 minutes, and Lily pressed her face against the window the whole time, watching the city lights as evening fell. Bella Vista Restaurant was in a part of town David rarely visited. The buildings here were cleaner, newer. The people walking by wore designer clothes and carried shopping bags from stores David had only seen in commercials. When they finally stood in front of the restaurant, Lily grabbed his hand tight. The entrance had a red carpet leading to tall glass doors. A doorman in a uniform stood outside. Through the windows, David could see crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths and people dressed like they were attending a wedding. Maybe this was a mistake, David muttered. "But Daddy, they're expecting us," Lily whispered. She was nervous too. He could tell by the way she squeezed his hand. Taking a deep breath, David straightened his old jacket and walked up to the entrance. The doorman opened the door with a slight nod and they stepped inside. The restaurant was even fancier than it looked from outside. Soft piano music played somewhere in the background. The air smelled like garlic and fresh bread and money. Everywhere David looked, he saw people who clearly belonged here. Women in elegant dresses, men in suits that probably cost more than his monthly rent. A young hostess at the front desk looked up as they approached. Her smile faltered just a bit when she saw them, and David noticed her eyes quickly take in his outdated suit and Lily's simple dress. It was a look he'd seen before, the look that said, "You don't belong here." "Reservation?" she asked, her voice polite but cool. "We're meeting Richard Harrison," David said, trying to sound confident. "The reservation should be under his name." Her expression changed immediately. "Oh, Mr. Harrison's party." "Yes, of course. Right this way." She led them through the restaurant, and David felt like everyone was watching them. Maybe they weren't. Maybe it was just in his head. But he felt painfully aware of every worn spot on his jacket, every scuff on Lily's shoes that he'd tried to polish away that morning. They reached a table near the back where Richard and Sophie were already waiting. Richard stood up immediately, a genuine smile on his face. He was dressed casually for him anyway. A nice shirt and slacks, no tie. Sophie jumped out of her seat when she saw them. "Lily," she called out, even though they'd never met before. Richard must have told her about David's daughter. "It's nice to meet you," Lily said shyly, remembering her manners. "Sit, please," Richard said, shaking David's hand warmly. "I'm so glad you came." "I wasn't sure you would." "Almost didn't," David admitted as they sat down. "This place is, well, it's pretty fancy," Richard laughed. "It's just food. Really good food, but still just food. Don't worry about anything. Order whatever looks good. Tonight's about good company, not the price tag." A waiter appeared almost instantly, filling their water glasses and handing out menus. David opened his and immediately felt his stomach drop. The prices had no dollar signs, which he'd heard meant they were really expensive. The cheapest thing he could find was a pasta dish for $38. $38. He usually fed himself and Lily for a week on that amount. Lily leaned over to whisper, "Daddy, I can't read half these words." She was right. The menu was full of French and Italian words that David didn't understand either. Coq au vin, ossobuco, bouillabaisse. He felt heat rising to his face. Richard noticed. "The menu here is a bit pretentious," he said kindly. "Honestly, I usually just order the chicken or the pasta." "Sophie, what do you want?" "Can I get the pasta with butter?" Sophie asked. "Simple and perfect," Richard said. Then he looked at David and Lily. "The chicken marsala is excellent. So is the fettuccine alfredo. Or if you like seafood, the salmon is really good." His tone was so casual, so normal, that David felt himself relax just a little. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. "I'll have the chicken," David said. "Lily, can I try the alfredo?" she asked quietly. "Absolutely," Richard said before David could even respond. He signaled to the waiter, who had been hovering nearby. But it wasn't the same waiter who'd brought the water. This was a young woman, maybe in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and kind eyes. She approached the table with a notepad and a warm smile. "Good evening, everyone. My name's Jenny, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with any drinks or appetizers?" David noticed something immediately. Unlike the hostess, unlike some of the other staff he'd seen, this waitress didn't look at them with judgment. Her smile reached her eyes, and when she looked at Lily, she seemed genuinely friendly. "Just water for us," David said quickly. The drinks menu had shown wine for $15 a glass, cocktails for $20. "Actually," Richard interjected, "let's get some lemonade for the girls." "And I'll have an iced tea, David." "Iced tea is fine," David agreed. Jenny wrote it down, then knelt down slightly to be at eye level with the girls. "And how are you two lovely ladies doing tonight? Is this a special occasion?" "We're making new friends," Sophie said brightly. "That's wonderful," Jenny said. She glanced at the menus in front of them. "Have you had a chance to look everything over, or would you like a few more minutes?" David was still staring at his menu, feeling lost. Jenny seemed to sense his uncertainty. "Can I make some recommendations?" she offered gently. "If you tell me what you usually like, I can point you towards some dishes that might be perfect." "I usually like regular food," David said, feeling embarrassed. "Chicken, pasta, nothing too complicated." "Got it," Jenny said without missing a beat. "So the chicken marsala is fantastic. It's chicken breast in a mushroom wine sauce with a side of mashed potatoes and vegetables. Very comfort food style, nothing weird or fancy. The fettuccine Alfredo is also great. Creamy sauce, really simple and delicious. And for the young lady," she smiled at Lily, "the kids' portions are pretty big here, so you might want the regular size Alfredo. That way you'll have room for dessert later." Lily's eyes lit up at the mention of dessert. "That sounds perfect," David said, grateful. "Chicken marsala for me, Alfredo for Lily." Richard ordered for himself and Sophie, and Jenny took the menus. But before she left, she did something small that David noticed. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out 2 crayons and a paper placemat with a tic-tac-toe game and a coloring section. "For you girls," she said, setting them down, "in case you get bored waiting for food." It was such a small thing, but it made Lily smile, and it made David realize this waitress understood something important. She knew what it was like to serve families who weren't drowning in money. She knew how to make people feel comfortable instead of out of place. The girls immediately started coloring, and the adults began to talk. Richard asked about David's life, about Lily, about how he managed working nights while raising a daughter alone. David found himself opening up more than he expected to. There was something about Richard's genuine interest that made it easy to talk. "It's not easy," David admitted. "Some days I feel like I'm failing. I can't give her the things other kids have. Can't afford summer camps or music lessons or trips to Disneyland. Hell, I can barely afford to keep the lights on some months." "But you're there," Richard said quietly. "That's what matters most. I have all the money in the world, and I'm still figuring out how to be a good father. My ex-wife says I prioritize work over family. She's probably right. I've missed more of Sophie's school events than I've attended. Money can't buy back time." David looked at Sophie, who was laughing with Lily over something they'd drawn on the placemat. "At least you're trying now. That counts for something." Jenny returned with their drinks and a basket of warm bread. As she set everything down, David noticed the restaurant manager watching from across the room. The manager, a thin man in an expensive suit, was looking at their table with an expression David couldn't quite read. But it didn't seem friendly. Jenny noticed too. Her smile tightened just a fraction, but she didn't let it affect her service. She made sure everyone had everything they needed, then left to check on other tables. "This bread is so good," Lily said, her mouth full. "Manners," David reminded her gently. Richard just laughed. "Sophie does the same thing. I've given up fighting that battle." The food arrived about 20 minutes later, and it was incredible. David couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten something this good. The chicken was tender and flavorful. The mashed potatoes were creamy and buttery, and everything was presented like a work of art. Lily's eyes were huge as she looked at her plate of pasta. "Daddy, this is the best thing I've ever eaten." Jenny had checked on them twice during the meal, making sure everything was cooked right, refilling drinks, and always with that same warm, genuine smile. She didn't hover like some servers did, but she was attentive. She seemed to know exactly when they needed something. At one point, Lily dropped her fork and it clattered to the floor. She looked mortified, her face turning red. But Jenny appeared immediately with a new fork, setting it down with a wink. "Happens all the time," she said quietly to Lily. "Don't worry about it at all." That small moment of kindness made David's chest feel tight. It would have been so easy for the staff here to make them feel bad, to treat them like they didn't belong, but Jenny hadn't done that. Not once. As they finished their meals, Richard excused himself to take a phone call. The girls asked if they could go look at the dessert case near the front of the restaurant, and David agreed as long as they stayed where he could see them. That left David alone at the table for a moment. He looked around the restaurant at all the wealthy people having their expensive meals, at the crystal and the chandeliers and the art on the walls. This wasn't his world. He knew that. But for one evening he was here, and his daughter was happy, and that meant everything. Jenny came by to clear the plates. "How was everything?" "Perfect," David said honestly. Then, because he felt she deserved to know, he added, "Thank you for being so kind to us tonight. You made us feel welcome." Jenny paused, holding the stack of plates. She glanced around to make sure the manager wasn't watching, then said quietly, "My dad raised me alone too. He worked 3 jobs to put me through college. I know what it looks like when someone's doing everything they can for their kid. You're doing a great job." Before David could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the kitchen with the plates. But her words stayed with him, wrapping around his heart like a warm blanket. Sometimes kindness from a stranger meant more than anything else in the world. Sometimes it reminded you that you weren't alone, that other people saw your struggle and respected it. David pulled out his wallet and looked at the few bills inside. He'd brought extra tonight. Money he'd set aside from tips he wasn't supposed to accept from residents in his building. He was going to leave a good tip for Jenny, the best he could manage. She'd earned it, and more importantly, she'd reminded him that good people existed everywhere, even in fancy restaurants where he didn't belong. The girls returned from the dessert case with excitement bubbling over. Sophie was talking about the chocolate cake, and Lily couldn't stop describing the strawberry cheesecake. David smiled, watching them, but inside he was doing quick math. He knew Richard said it was his treat, but even so, David felt uncomfortable letting someone else pay for everything. Richard came back from his phone call looking a bit tired, but still in good spirits. "So what's the verdict on dessert?" "Can we share the chocolate cake?" Sophie asked. "And can we get the cheesecake too?" Lily added, then quickly looked at her father. "I mean, if that's okay." Richard laughed. "I think we can manage both. We'll get a few desserts and everyone can share. How's that sound?" The girls agreed enthusiastically, and Richard signaled for Jenny. She came over with that same easy smile, and Richard ordered an assortment: the chocolate cake, cheesecake, and tiramisu for the table. As Jenny walked away to put in the order, David noticed the restaurant manager approaching their table. The man's expression was neutral, professional, but something about his eyes made David uncomfortable. "Mr. Harrison, I hope everything has been satisfactory this evening," the manager said, his voice smooth. "Excellent as always, Charles," Richard replied. The manager's gaze shifted briefly to David and Lily just for a second, but it was enough. David saw the assessment, the judgment. Then the man's professional mask returned. "Wonderful. I'll make sure your desserts receive special attention." After he left, David felt a knot in his stomach. Maybe he was being oversensitive, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he and Lily weren't welcome here. Not really. Sure, they were Richard's guests, and that bought them a certain level of respect, but without him, they would never have made it past the front door. Jenny returned shortly with a tray of desserts that looked almost too beautiful to eat. She set them down carefully, making sure to give each girl a small plate and fork. "Now this," she said with a grin, "is the best part of the meal. I've been known to come in on my day off just for this chocolate cake." "Really?" Sophie asked, her eyes wide. "Really. The chef makes it with Belgian chocolate. It's incredible." Jenny caught David's eye for just a moment, and he saw something there, understanding, maybe even a hint of solidarity, like she knew exactly how he was feeling and wanted him to know it was okay. The desserts were as amazing as the rest of the meal. The girls giggled as they shared bites of everything, getting chocolate on their faces. Even Richard seemed to relax more, laughing at something Sophie said with whipped cream on her nose. David took a bite of the tiramisu and had to stop himself from making a sound. He'd never tasted anything like it. Growing up, dessert had been store-brand cookies or maybe ice cream on special occasions. His wife used to make brownies from a box mix and they'd thought that was fancy. This was a different world entirely. Good, right? Richard said, noticing David's expression. Unbelievable, David admitted. As they finished dessert, the conversation flowed easily. Richard talked about his work in real estate, about the stress of his divorce, about his worries that he wasn't being a good enough father. David shared stories about Lily, about the challenges of single parenthood, about his wife and how much he still missed her. You know what the hardest part is? David said, his voice quieter. Not the money, not the exhaustion. It's the moments when Lily needs her mom and I can't be that for her. Like when she asks questions about growing up girl stuff, you know? Or when she's sad and wants that specific kind of comfort only her mother could give. Those times I feel completely helpless. Richard nodded slowly. I'm not dealing with loss like you are, but I understand feeling inadequate. Sophie asked me why I can't fix my marriage with her mother and I don't have a good answer. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that sometimes love isn't enough? That adults make mistakes and hurt each other and can't always find their way back? The two men sat in silence for a moment, united by the shared weight of fatherhood and its impossible demands. Jenny approached the table again, and David noticed she moved differently than the other servers. She wasn't rushing, wasn't performing. She seemed genuinely invested in making sure her customers were happy. She refilled water glasses and asked if anyone wanted coffee or tea. Just the check, please, Richard said. Of course, I'll be right back with that. As she walked away, David reached for his wallet. He'd been thinking about this all evening. He pulled out $40, money he really couldn't afford to part with, but money he felt was important to leave. Jenny had made this night special not just with good service, but with genuine kindness. She'd seen him and Lily as people, not as outsiders. When Jenny returned with the check, Richard immediately handed her a credit card without even looking at the total. She processed it quickly and brought back the receipt for him to sign. David waited until Richard was distracted talking to Sophie. Then he quietly placed his $40 on the table, tucked under his water glass where Jenny would find it. It was probably less than she deserved, but it was all he could spare. The girls were getting sleepy now, the excitement of the evening catching up with them. Lily leaned against David's shoulder, and Sophie was rubbing her eyes. It was time to go. They all stood up, gathering their things. Richard helped Sophie with her jacket while David made sure Lily had her small purse. As they prepared to leave, Jenny returned to the table one last time. Thank you so much for coming in tonight, she said to the group. Then she looked directly at Lily. And you were such a wonderful young lady. Your father should be very proud of you. Lily beamed, suddenly less tired. Thank you for the crayons and for being nice. My pleasure, sweetheart. As they started to walk away, Jenny began clearing the table. David saw her notice the money he'd left, separate from Richard's payment. She looked up, catching his eye across the restaurant. For just a second, their gazes met and something passed between them. Understanding, respect, a recognition of what that money represented. David gave her a small nod, and she nodded back. No words were needed. Outside the restaurant, the night air was cool and refreshing after the warmth inside. Sophie and Lily were saying goodbye, promising to be friends while Richard and David stood nearby. Thank you for tonight, David said. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to, Richard replied. It's been nice talking to someone who understands what it's like. Most of my friends, they're divorced too, but they have nannies and housekeepers and unlimited resources. They don't understand what it means to actually be present for your kid, while also trying to survive. Well, I appreciated it. Lily had an amazing time. This is probably the nicest thing anyone's done for us in years. Richard pulled out his phone. Let me call you a car to take you home. It's late and you shouldn't have to take the bus. Really not necessary. Please. It's no trouble at all. Richard was already typing on his phone. There. A car will be here in 3 minutes. David wanted to argue, but he was tired, and the thought of not having to navigate buses with a sleepy 8-year-old was too tempting. Thank you. They waited together on the sidewalk, the city lights reflecting off the buildings around them. Lily held David's hand, half asleep on her feet. Daddy, she murmured, can we come back here someday? David's heart clenched. Maybe, baby. Someday? I really like Sophie, and Jenny was really nice. This was the best night ever. I'm glad, sweetheart. The car arrived, a sleek black sedan that was nicer than any vehicle David had ever been in. The driver got out and opened the door for them. Richard shook David's hand one more time. I mean it, Richard said. Let's stay in touch. Maybe the girls can have a play date sometime. And if you ever need anything at all, you have my number now. I appreciate that. Really, David. And Lily got into the car, and as they pulled away from the curb, Lily immediately fell asleep against his shoulder. David looked out the window at the passing city, thinking about the strange evening they'd just had. He thought about Richard, a millionaire who seemed genuinely lonely despite all his wealth and success. He thought about the music box and how a simple repair had led to all of this. He thought about the looks from some of the restaurant staff, the ones who saw him and Lily as outsiders. And he thought about Jenny, who had treated them with such kindness. Jenny, who had understood without being told. Jenny, who had made them feel like they belonged, at least for one evening. Back at the restaurant, Jenny was finishing her shift. She'd found the $40 David left and understood immediately what it meant. She'd seen him and Richard reviewing the check, knew that Richard was paying. This money was separate, personal. It was from a man who probably couldn't afford it but wanted to show appreciation anyway. She thought about her own father, who had passed away 2 years ago. He'd been a mechanic, worked 60-hour weeks to put her through college. Never complained, never asked for anything in return. He'd been so proud when she graduated, even though it meant he'd spent years with barely any savings, living paycheck to paycheck. She saw the same thing in David tonight, the same sacrifice, the same love, the same quiet determination to give his child a better life than he'd had. It was in the way he looked at his daughter, in the gentle corrections of her table manners, in the worn suit he'd clearly pulled out of the back of his closet for this special occasion. The restaurant manager, Charles, approached her as she was counting her tips at the end of the night. That table with Mr. Harrison, he said, his tone carefully neutral. I hope you maintained our standards despite the varied clientele. Jenny looked at him steadily. Every customer got exactly the service they deserved. The father and daughter were kind, polite, and appreciative. More than I can say for some of our regular wealthy customers who treat us like servants. Charles's expression tightened, but he didn't say anything more. He simply walked away. Jenny didn't care. She'd been working at Bella Vista for 3 years, putting herself through grad school. She'd dealt with rude customers, demanding managers, and the constant reminder that she was supposed to be grateful for the privilege of serving people who made more in a month than she'd make in a year. But nights like tonight reminded her why she kept going. The chance to make someone feel seen, to offer kindness when it was needed most. That mattered more than anything else. She tucked David's $40 into her pocket along with the rest of her tips. As she changed out of her work clothes and prepared to go home to her tiny apartment and her mountain of student loans, she found herself smiling. She hoped David and Lily were safe at home now. She hoped they were happy. And she hoped somehow that their lives would get easier. They deserved it. Sometimes the best thing you can do in this world is recognize someone else's struggle and treat them with dignity. Sometimes that small act of respect means more than any amount of money ever could. Jenny walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air, thinking about her father and about David and about all the people in the world who worked hard and loved deeply and deserved so much more than they got. She made a promise to herself. She'd keep being kind, keep seeing people, keep treating everyone with the respect they deserved, regardless of their clothes or their wallets or their place in society, because kindness costs nothing. And sometimes it means everything. David couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his small bedroom, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening over and over in his mind. Lily had fallen asleep the moment her head hit the pillow, exhausted but happy. He'd tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and then sat in his dark living room for an hour just thinking. The apartment was quiet except for the usual city sounds. Cars passing, someone's TV through the thin walls, the hum of the old refrigerator. David thought about the restaurant, about how out of place he'd felt, but also about the moments that had made him feel human. Richard's genuine friendship, Jenny's kindness, the way Lily had smiled all evening. But what really stuck with him was something Jenny had said. "My dad raised me alone too. I know what it looks like when someone's doing everything they can for their kid." Those words had hit him harder than anything else, because most days David didn't feel like he was doing enough. He felt like he was failing, constantly. He couldn't afford the things other kids had. He couldn't be at school events because he was sleeping after his night shift. He couldn't help with homework because he was barely awake. He couldn't fix the pain of losing her mother. Most days, he felt like he was just barely surviving, not actually parenting. But Jenny had seen something different. She'd seen someone trying. Someone who showed up. Someone who loved his daughter enough to sacrifice everything for her. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it had to be. The next few days passed in their usual rhythm. David worked his night shifts at Sterling Tower, came home, exhausted, got Lily ready for school, slept a few hours, and then picked her up in the afternoon. But something felt different now. The dinner had opened a small window to a different kind of life, a reminder that good things could still happen. Richard had texted him twice, once to make sure they got home safely, and once to share a funny photo of Sophie wearing a paper crown she'd made, declaring herself Princess of the Music Box. David had sent back a picture of Lily doing her homework at their kitchen table, and Richard responded with genuine interest, asking what she was learning. It was strange having a friend who lived in such a different world, but it was also nice. Richard didn't talk down to him or treat him like a charity case. He talked to him like an equal, like someone whose experiences and opinions mattered. On Wednesday evening, David was cleaning the executive floor again when he ran into Richard in his office. It was earlier than usual, only 9 p.m., and Richard was packing up his briefcase. "David!" Richard seemed genuinely happy to see him. "How's it going?" "Same as always," David said with a slight smile. "How's Sophie?" "She hasn't stopped talking about that dinner. She keeps asking when she can see Lily again." Richard paused, then added, "Actually, I've been thinking about something. Do you have a minute?" David set down his cleaning supplies. "Sure." Richard gestured to the chair across from his desk, and David sat down feeling a bit awkward. He'd never actually sat in one of these expensive office chairs before. Always stood, always been the janitor, never the guest. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me," Richard began. "Do you like this job?" David wasn't sure how to answer. "It pays the bills." "That's not what I asked." David thought about it. "No," he finally admitted. "I don't like it, but I'm grateful for it. It's reliable, it has benefits, and the timing works for Lily's schedule. I can't really ask for more than that." Richard leaned back in his chair. "What did you do before this?" "I worked at an auto repair shop. I was good at it too. But after my wife died and the medical bills piled up, I needed something that paid more. This job came with health insurance and better hourly pay, so I took it." "You're good with your hands. I saw that with the music box. What else can you fix?" David shrugged. "Pretty much anything. Growing up, my dad taught me how to fix everything: cars, appliances, electronics. He always said it was a waste to throw something away just because it's broken. If you know how things work, you can fix them." Richard was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There's a position opening up in my company, facilities manager. It would be managing the maintenance and repairs for all my buildings. I own 6 commercial properties around the city. The person who does it now is retiring next month." David felt his heart start to beat faster. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you'd be good at it. It pays significantly more than what you're making now. Regular daytime hours, full benefits, and there's even a scholarship fund we offer to employees' children for education." David couldn't speak for a moment. This felt too good to be true. "Richard, I don't have any management experience. I'm a janitor." "You're a skilled tradesman who happens to be worky." "That's known as a janitor," Richard corrected. "There's a difference. And honestly, the technical skills matter more than the title. The person I need can diagnose problems, fix what's broken, and coordinate repairs. That's you." "I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet. Think about it. I'll email you the job description and details. Talk it over with Lily if you want. But David, I'm serious about this. It's not charity. I need someone reliable who actually knows what they're doing, and I think you're that person. David felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope that life might actually get better. Can I ask you something? Why are you doing this? Because you fixed my daughter's most precious possession when you didn't have to. Because you're raising your daughter alone while working a hard job and still managing to be kind. Because I can afford to give people opportunities, and I'm tired of giving them to people who already have everything. Richard paused, and honestly, because talking to you reminds me of what's actually important. You're doing the hardest job in the world, being a single parent, and you're doing it with grace. That's worth something. David felt his eyes getting hot. He blinked hard. Thank you, really, this means more than you know. Take your time deciding. The job doesn't start for 3 weeks anyway, but I hope you'll take it. As David left the office and returned to his cleaning duties, his mind was racing. A better job. Daytime hours. More money. A scholarship fund for Lily. The possibility of actually building a real life again instead of just surviving. He thought about his wife. About how she'd always believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. She'd told him once, shortly before she died, "You're going to be okay. You're stronger than you think, and Lily is lucky to have you." At the time, he'd thought she was just being kind, saying things to comfort herself, but maybe she'd been right. Maybe he was stronger than he thought. That Saturday, David took Lily to the park, a rare treat since he was usually sleeping during the day. They sat on a bench together, sharing a pretzel from a street vendor, watching other kids play. "Lily," he said carefully, "how would you feel if Daddy got a different job?" She looked up at him. "Would you still be my daddy?" He laughed. "Of course. But I might work during the day instead of at night. Which means I could pick you up from school every day, help with homework, maybe even come to your school events." Lily's eyes got wide. "Really? You could come to my class play? Mrs. Peterson is doing a show next month and I'm going to be a flower. I could definitely come to that, then yes." She hugged him tight. "I miss you when you're sleeping all day." "I miss you too, baby." The decision was made. That evening, David emailed Richard accepting the position. It felt like stepping off a cliff, trusting that there would be something solid to land on. But sometimes you had to take that leap. The next 2 weeks flew by in a blur. David gave his notice to the cleaning company, trained his replacement, and started learning about his new job. Richard's current facilities manager, an older man named Tom, was patient and thorough, teaching David everything he needed to know about the properties, the systems, the common problems. "You'll do fine," Tom told him on his last day. "You've got good instincts. Trust them." David's first official day in his new position felt surreal. He arrived at 8 a.m., dressed in regular work clothes, jeans and a company polo shirt, and walked through the front entrance of Sterling Tower like a regular employee instead of slipping in through the service entrance. He had an office. A small one, but an office nonetheless, with his name on the door. The work was challenging but satisfying. He coordinated repairs, inspected buildings, solved problems. He was using his mind and his skills in ways he hadn't in years. And the best part was coming home in the evening. Being there when Lily finished her homework, cooking dinner together, reading bedtime stories. "Daddy seems happier," Lily said one night as he tucked her in. "I am happier," he admitted. "Are you happier too?" "So much happier. I like having you home." 3 weeks into his new job, David got his first paycheck. It was more than double what he'd been making as a janitor. He sat in his car in the parking lot staring at the number and cried. Not sad tears, but relief. For the first time in 3 years, he could breathe. He could pay his bills without juggling which ones to delay. He could buy Lily new shoes without anxiety. He could save a little money. That evening, he did something impulsive. He called the restaurant Bella Vista and asked to speak with a manager. When Charles answered, David asked if Jenny was working that evening. "May I ask what this is regarding?" Charles said suspiciously. "I'd like to make a reservation and request her as our server. She was exceptional last time we dined there." Charles's tone changed immediately. "Of course. What time would you like?" David made a reservation for the following Saturday. Just him and Lily this time, not Richard. This was something he needed to do himself. When Saturday came, they arrived at the restaurant dressed in their same clothes as before. David in his old suit, Lily in her Sunday dress. But this time David didn't feel quite as out of place. He walked in with his head up because he'd earned this meal. He wasn't anyone's charity case tonight. The hostess seated them in Jenny's section just as requested. When Jenny came to the table and saw them, her face lit up with genuine surprise and pleasure. "Well, hello again. I didn't expect to see you two back so soon." "We wanted to come back," David said. "And we wanted you to be our server again." Jenny smiled that warm smile of hers. "Well, I'm honored. What can I get started for you tonight?" They ordered, more confidently this time, David asking Jenny's opinion on dishes and actually being able to afford whatever Lily wanted. As they ate, David thought about the last time they'd been here, about how far they'd come in just a few weeks. When Jenny brought the check at the end of the meal, David pulled out his wallet. This time he had his own credit card to use. And when he added the tip, he wrote in a number that made his hand shake slightly. $100, it was probably too much. It would mean being careful with money for the rest of the month, but Jenny had reminded him that he mattered, that his efforts as a father counted for something. She'd treated him and Lily with dignity when they had nothing. That was worth everything. As they prepared to leave, David caught Jenny's attention one more time. "I wanted to thank you," he said quietly. "Last time we were here, you said something that really stuck with me. About your dad raising you alone and how you could tell I was trying. I needed to hear that. I'd been feeling like I was failing. But you helped me see that just showing up and loving your kid is enough." Jenny's eyes got a little misty. "You're not failing. Not even close. And I meant what I said. Your daughter is lucky to have you. I also wanted you to know that things have gotten better. I got a new job, better hours, better pay. Life is starting to feel manageable again. And part of that is because people like you and Richard reminded me that I deserve good things too. I'm so happy for you," Jenny said, and she clearly meant it. As they left the restaurant, Lily held David's hand and said, "That was even better than last time." "Yeah," David agreed. "It really was. Because this time he wasn't just a guest at someone else's table. He was building his own life, creating his own moments of joy. And it felt amazing. 10 years passed like pages turning in a book. Some chapters were harder than others, but the story kept moving forward and somehow it kept getting better. David stood in the audience of the university auditorium, his eyes fixed on the stage where graduates in caps and gowns filed in. His heart was pounding with pride as he searched the sea of faces for one in particular. Then he saw her, Lily, now 18 years old, walking with confidence in her graduation robes. She'd made it. They'd made it. The scholarship fund from Richard's company had covered most of her college expenses. The rest came from Lily's part-time jobs and David's careful saving. It hadn't been easy, but nothing worth having ever was. As the ceremony concluded and families flooded the lawn for photos, Lily ran to David and threw her arms around him. She was taller now, a young woman instead of the little girl who'd once sat nervously at a fancy restaurant. "We did it, Dad," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," he corrected, holding her tight. "I'm so proud of you, baby. I couldn't have done it without you. Everything you sacrificed, all those years working so hard, it was all for this moment." David pulled back to look at her. "It was all for you, and you were worth every second." They took photos, celebrated with Richard and Sophie, who had come to the graduation. Sophie was in high school now, and the girls had remained close friends over the years. Richard had become one of David's closest friends, someone he talked to regularly about life, work, and the constant adventure of parenting. After the celebration died down and they'd said their goodbyes, Lily turned to David with a mysterious smile. "Dad, I need to take you somewhere." "Where?" "It's a surprise. Trust me." They drove downtown and David's curiosity grew when Lily directed him to park near Bella Vista Restaurant. The place looked exactly the same as it had a decade ago. Still elegant, still intimidating for a guy like him, even though he could actually afford to eat there now. "Why are we here?" David asked. "You'll see. Come on." They walked inside and the hostess greeted the